Well, good morning, might be afternoon, might be evening when you're listening to this, but I am Debra Jacobs. I'm the president and CEO of the Patterson Foundation, and I'm thrilled that I'm with three TPF fellows who are going to today talk about one of TPF's concepts. But before we get into our concepts, I'd like to introduce them. So John Ferguson is in the waving now. Very good. He will be speaking, and next speaker will be LaGrange. Give us a wave. That's good. And our final speaker today will be Michael Zimmerman. And now you know who each of them are, but they also named their screen, which is always very helpful. So today, the Patterson Foundation, I want to remind us, our mission is to strengthen individuals, organizations, and communities in ways that foster wide participation. And we are driven by our values. That's a whole nother webinar recording you can listen to, but it's the how we do our work that is what we're going to cover today. TPF, that's our nickname for the Patterson Foundation. TPF has many fives. And today we're going to talk about the fives that we call CLSES. And that's the easy way that we remember: connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening. And these 5 words actually are how we do our work. People often want to know, what does the Patterson Foundation do? We work through initiatives that we select that will enable us to, again, strengthen individuals, organizations, or communities in ways that foster wide participation. So today we're going to give you a glimpse into how TPF rolls with connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening. CLSES, what the heck is that? It's actually closes the door without the O in there, if you're wondering how will you ever keep track of this. But anyway, let's go to connect, learn, share, evolve, strengthen through John's perspective. John?
Debra, thanks so much. And the perspective I'll use to really talk about what CLSES is in action is through the Digital Access for All initiative. So I've had the privilege of being involved in that initiative since its very inception all the way to present day. And it started in June of 2020 as a response to the pandemic. We started hearing more and more about this digital divide and digital access, and what does that mean, and what can that mean for our communities to actually have that. But we needed to understand it first. So it really started kind of with connecting and learning at the same time, because all we had were questions. We had no answers. We were not the experts there. We are still not the experts there. There are plenty of those in the world that we lean on. And we started with a single conversation with one of the thought leaders within the digital equity space, and found out from them, what do you see as the issue? What is everything to do with digital access that we can understand? How can we wrap our arms around this and understand the holistic aspect of the problem, not just the you need better internet connection, because it's a lot more than that, as we found out. But that single conversation then ended with another question, right? Who else do we talk to? Who else cares about this? Who do we need to know? And that one conversation led to 60 conversations over the span of several months. And that was just on the national and the regional level. Simultaneously, we were having conversations on the local level, trying to figure out who else is looking at this problem? Who else is kind of playing in this sandbox, if you will, and trying to find a solution for digital equity and digital access. And through that, we found a way to really distill all that information down so that we could share it with the community far and wide, not only with those who were working on it, but for those who maybe didn't realize how grave an issue it was, especially when it was exacerbated by the pandemic. So those two things really worked in tandem, and still do to this day, because we're continuously learning more. You may know that the internet changes from time to time and moment to moment, and new technology comes out on seemingly a moment's notice. We need to be able to stay ahead of that and really understand that, and so do our partners. And it's all in an effort to really strengthen the community. So as that initiative continues to evolve, those little small conversations have now become quite large in some ways, with regular communication with all community partners that are in this. And that's sometimes upwards of 40 or 50 organizations. So there's also small little what we call campfires, that have emerged that are really focused on a specific project. Like, how can we do digital access better within the library system is one example. And there's many of those that come up, and each of those connect on a regular basis, continue to learn and share with each other as we evolve our efforts to really strengthen our communities through digital access.
You know, John, I have to tell you, I'm pretty impressed. Not only did you talk about the concepts, but you wove them into sentences like it's a natural way TPF behaves.
I'll tell you, the longer that you're at TPF, the more natural it becomes. So trust me, that becomes just part of your language and part of your being, because it's a way of working. It's not a checklist to hit on the box. It's how you do the work and how you work with others to achieve those results.
And I want to, you said it, I'm going to repeat it for emphasis, about the concept of who else cares. Okay, the concept of figuring out who else cares, that's part of the connecting and the learning that comes out of that. So it's always, we can't work in silos. We can't work alone. There's a lot of smart people out there, and we need to make sure that we're using those connections. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to move on, but I might come back. All right. So I'm going to move on to Connor. Give us your perspective on connect, learn, share, evolve, strengthen.
Yes, thank you, Debra. And I'll tag on to a couple things that John said, but attempt to weave it in my own tapestry as it's come to my work at TPF. One of the initiatives that I've been involved in and a pretty deep level has been our nonprofit thrivability initiatives. And recently, TPF kicked off a new initiative within the thrivability umbrella, and that initiative is fueling dynamic fundraising. And I think for most, CLSES is sometimes not a linear process, but in this example, it really turned out to be quite a linear process in our way of being coming to the forefront. So in starting fueling dynamic fundraising, fellows John Ferguson and Abby Rowland really thought, how can we connect better with other leaders within the philanthropic space to provide an offering that maybe we haven't before? And so within that, instead of just jumping right in and saying, this is what we're going to do because we think it's the best idea, John and Abby really spent time actually listening and learning to the nonprofits within our region. They hosted listening sessions with executive directors and boards and staff to see what really cropped up to the surface as far as what issues they felt were pressing within the sector from their perspective. I think that's a little bit different than sometimes how other organizations work. TPF really sits in the space with other people to truly listen and learn and ask genuine questions as to what would be helpful to you, as opposed to this is what we think is helpful for you. So after these listening sessions, TPF found themselves in a space of being able to share their resources with those nonprofits. One of the things that cropped up in the listening sessions is that nonprofits feel that their fundraising is a little lacking sometimes, and that there might be a better board and staff engagement within that development department. And so for us, we have a great partnership as the Patterson Foundation with the Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. That's where we all came from. We're good friends with the folks up there. And within the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy is the preeminent fundraising school, really within the world, the fundraising school. They're the number one, and so they got the name, the fundraising school. No other explanation needed. So we were able to leverage previous connections that we have to share our resource and share others' expertise, knowing that we don't necessarily arrive with the answers, but we've got some good friends who ask good questions and have some answers of their own. So by being able to pair with the fundraising school, we were able to, as Debra, you like to say, share our cookies with others and introduce our nonprofit friends here in the Suncoast region to other organizations who are truly making an impact, who are data-driven, who really know their stuff, and able to strengthen those organizations by offering a 6-week course with the fundraising school that allowed nonprofits and their boards and their staff to sit through some fundraising training, some questions to be asked of their donors. And to be honest, I think what my favorite part and where I got to jump in on board was that we didn't stop there. Heard that fundraising was an issue facing nonprofits. We knew we had some good friends who could tackle those types of issues. We offered an initiative. We offered 6 weeks of courses coupled with a year long of consulting. But instead of stopping there and saying we did a good job, stamp of approval, we've continued to evolve the offering. We've continued to ask the organizations who are in our pilot, hey, what worked? What could have been done differently? What could have been done better? How can we streamline these processes? And we've continued to evolve this FDF offering that cohort 2 may look very different from cohort 1. And this is an opportunity to give every individual organization a unique and excellent experience by continually evolving things and never staying static. And lastly, to the idea of strengthening, John mentioned that CLSES is a way of being. Sometimes it's a way of being that maybe goes without credit. So for instance, with the nonprofits we've been able to work with through FDF, we can see immediate impacts that this courses have. We can see the ways that they're strengthened, but we haven't seen all of the ways that they're strengthened. And some of the return on investment for us may be years down the road with ripple effects throughout the Suncoast region as those nonprofits go into their own communities and strengthen other individuals. So for me, it's interesting that a lot of what TPF does can sometimes fly under the radar, and it's a continuation of propping people up to be their best selves, and as the initiative states, to find a space where they can live in their own thrivability.
Wow, you've got so many nuggets in there. I just want to jump in and affirm is I do want to, and I open it up to everybody on this one. TPF talks about the cookie jar, all right, in that every person, every organization has a cookie jar with nuggets and sweet intelligence, good tricks and ideas inside it. At TPF, we like to take the lid off the cookie jar, share our cookies, but then also find out what's in your cookie jar and how can we work. Does anybody want to give an example of cookie jar in action, John?
Well, I want to give an overall example of it, not necessarily a specific, but it really is amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. When it doesn't become about a tagline or an award, and it's simply about the work, the impacts of the work, and how it can thrive into the future, things become possible that aren't possible when ego is at play. So when that credit is underneath the surface, Connor, or it's not of import to you or those you're working with, there's nothing hindering it. You can just keep going and going and going and bring all the cookies in and see which tastes the best and go from there.
Okay. Any other cookie jar, Michael?
Yeah, and I'll add to that when nonprofits are pursuing work and looking at their operations on a day-to-day basis and thinking in terms of what can we do better, but only having those conversations within their team, it's so important that we are able to also see what cookies exist in the other cookie jars at other nonprofits, because it may be that same challenge is a challenge that another nonprofit's confronting, and they may have solutions or other ways in which they're approaching that challenge that could be of tremendous value to that very team that's gathered trying to think it through. And I think that's the beauty of how we come together to share our cookies, and also with our curiosity around, well, what are the cookies that are in that other cookie jar over there and over here, and how do we improve by sharing and growing together? So I think that's a powerful tool that we use here at TPF.
Connor, did anything more on the cookie jar?
Yeah, it kind of tags on to Michael's continuation of growth through sharing your cookies. And Debra, you mentioned something yesterday that slightly offhand, but I think it really resonated with me. The idea of for us as an organization and even as people, if we're not constantly putting our ideas out there and saying what works with these, what's a good idea, how can we change these, our ideas may start to become stale. And maybe we're really good at something as an organization, but if we're not in constant communication with others as to how to improve that, being good at that one thing may quickly go away as you're insulated. You're almost siloed within your own cookie jar. And so it's a bit of a biblical proverb, the idea of iron sharpening iron. So when you're sharing your cookies, you're actually finding out that you have better cookies within your cookie jar because you continue to evolve your own recipe, not just sharing with others and receiving from others, but melting recipes together to have the best cookies in the world, because it's a continually evolving process.
And let's just remember basic, who doesn't like a cookie? All right, so we all love the cookies. All right, so I'm gonna head over to Michael Zimmerman. I've got some other things I'm gonna add, but I want to make sure he gets his turn also. And Michael, you're kind of the newbie around here. So, you got 2 months under your belt at TPF. What's closest? How's this resonating for you?
Yeah, I am the newbie, and thank you, Deborah. I'm new to CLSES, and it's pretty fascinating. It's been a fun experience so far, seeing CLSES emerge in almost everything we do, from Remake Learning Days to Aspirations Journalism, Fueling Dynamic Fundraising, Digital Access for All, two initiatives that you heard about from my colleagues, fellows, Connor and John. Really, to any other initiative on which TPF endeavors, CLSES is embedded in that. And I think that's very important because TPF has to be in that space. That's the way we work. It's an approach. It's a way of being. It's not a checkbox, as John alluded. And I can also speak to, even in my work with TPF's Aspirations Journalism, I saw that come alive. We had connected parents and teachers and leaders in the community, other community members of the Spanish-speaking population, for an interview to discuss how we as parents are our children's first teacher. So that's interesting and so important when you have Spanish-speaking parents and their children coming to them with their homework, which is in English, not knowing how to help. So we shared in our program resources and ways in which parents can go and find resources for their children, so that when other English-speaking parents can be there, as we may have experienced growing up with our parents when we had homework and we didn't know something and we said, hey, mom, dad, could you help me with this? Or another family member or sibling. They may not have that. So being able to connect with others that are Spanish speakers, hear them on the radio or see them on Facebook or wherever we may emit the program, is so important, because now our community is strengthened because we shared knowledge of where those resources exist. And we've been able to bring together a community that would maybe not know where to go to make sure that their children don't fall behind. So I think that's how we see connecting, learning, and sharing happen, by creating a program on the radio where we share these resources and connect to parents and other family members. And then we strengthen the community, as I mentioned, which I think is important, because when we see as a result, and it's slow, but it happens over time, an evolution of how our community evolves to include. And I think that's where we see CLSES living and breathing within our work at TPF.
Okay. So I want to, we as we think about all the letters, the words, I want to focus for a second on the Evolve department. And TPF, again, Connor, you mentioned we don't arrive with the answer, we let it emerge, but I'd like to hear just a snippet about how pilots evolving, how in the initiatives we've seen that it's important not to put your stake on the ground. We know what we're doing and we're rolling this baby out. So talk about how pilots have played in that. John?
Yeah, I think one critical thing to understand about pilots is when you tell somebody they're in a pilot and you mean it, that gives you the space to iterate, right? That means it's not a complete product yet. Here's a little secret. Nothing's ever a complete product. It's just not, because it can always be better. You know, at TPF, we strive for excellence always, but excellence isn't something that you attain and then just stay there. It's something you have to pursue all the time. So if we're giving the same program, you know, I look at Fueling Dynamic Fundraising, Connor, if we're doing the same thing 2 years from now that we're doing today, we're doing it wrong, right? So we have to make sure that we're staying ahead of the trends and we understand what it is. If the needs shift, how do we respond to that? Yeah, well, let's say everybody masters fundraising. Okay, well, now what? So we need to make sure that we're ahead of that. Probably might not happen, but it could in our aspirations, right? So thinking of it as a process that's always evolving. It's not that evolution is the mark of an initiative at a certain point. It's just continuously how they roll. And that's why when you're in something for the long term, it has to evolve to continue to stay current, stay relevant, and stay important.
You make me think of the phrase patience, grasshopper. We're in it. We're working on it. We're going to do it. Connor, what
The
have
other
you got?
people are laughing on this screen because patience is not necessarily a virtue that I possess, but it does remind me of that phrase as well.
Yes, patience, grasshopper. Connor, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the evolution of pilots, and especially when you say, evolution or evolving can sometimes be synonymous with change. And we tend to say that change, only happens at the speed of trust. And how can you get people to trust and buy in? Well, I've noticed that a lot of times the trust building process starts with humility. And as an organization, if you put your stake in the ground and say, this is what we do, we're never changing it, and it's good, that may not be the most humble thing in the history of the world. And in turn, may not build trust with the people that you think you're serving. So for us, as we think about the evolution process, it's all about ensuring that our partners truly trust us. And so when we come in, and as John said, we mentioned, hey, this is a pilot and we mean it. Part of that is building the trust with our nonprofits for them to say, hey, this didn't work so great. And us having the humility on our end to say, you know what, you're right, it didn't. What are some ideas going forward that can make it better? So if we truly believe that the trust is the crux of that, I think organizationally, and we tend to do a decent job demonstrating it, it starts with the humility of, again, it sounds cliche, but not arriving with the answers comes from finding ourselves in a spot of humility to admit, we may not know the best practices. Please inform us of ones that you can think of, and we'll begin to change and grow in that direction.
Okay. Michael?
And one more thing I'll add is that when we look at how we can be catalytic, how we can start to grow something, knowing that a result of growth is evolution, is evolving, and giving space for that evolution to happen is part of how we shift and remain agile in ensuring that we're checking in to make sure, is this, even though this plan was made 6 months ago or a year ago or last month, does this plan still apply to what the emerging needs are? And as those needs emerge, have we given ourselves space to evolve, shift, and change in order to be successful and pursue excellence in our work? And I think that's another facet to CLSES, because it's part of TPF's identity.
Okay. I don't know if our viewers or listeners can tell our enthusiasm. We could go on and on and on, but I'd like to give us if anybody has a comment on the concept that we use called knowledge sharing sessions. How does knowledge sharing sessions play out in CLSES? Has anybody got how they'd like to talk about that, John?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So first off, what is this thing called a knowledge sharing session, right? So a knowledge sharing session is something that we do, especially within a pilot, but generally within any initiative at the end. So at an end point. So for example, with Fueling Dynamic Fundraising that Connor was describing earlier, that first cohort that's gone through those 6 sessions from the fundraising school, we had a knowledge sharing session with them. What that means is they had the opportunity to talk about, hey, this is what really was impactful for us, how this resonated with us. Here's some things that you should probably know that could improve the next pilot. But also they got to share their cookies with each other. So it's not just a transactional between TPF and them, it's everybody all together learning and sharing from each other, which also builds that relationship and strengthens that connection within that cohort. And we'll do that every time. And the real benefit of those knowledge sharing sessions is not only learning what was impactful and what maybe wasn't, but more importantly, hearing them learn from each other and spark different ideas from what someone else said that they can then implement into their practice that improves and strengthens what it is that they do. So that's really the magic in that. And that's how that trust is developed, Connor, in those real authentic communications. And the knowledge sharing session is a space we convene to allow for that type of communication to happen.
I'm going to give everybody a chance, if you're bursting with any closing thought that you would like to share on our Connecting, Learn, Share, Evolve, Strengthen. Anybody bursting with anything on there that you have? Okay, well, you're not bursting, then we're going to thank our viewers for being with us. And as always, it's a delight to work with each of you. You come at it from a different way, but that's what makes TPF's impact all the more glorious. So thank you very much. And onward, we've got things to accomplish in the world.